Well, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Best Practices for Teaching with Digital Curricula in Corrections Classes. Our webinar today is sponsored and presented by Essential Education, and today we have Charlie Weeks. He is the Director of Client Success for Essential Ed, and Steph Haggard. She's an Educator Support Specialist. And if you have any questions, you can submit those in the Q&A box. Otherwise, if you could let us know where you're calling in from today in the chat box, give us your name. That'd be great. I see people are already doing that. And with that, I'll hand it over to our presenters. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Let me go ahead and switch my screen and we'll get started. So again, thank you all for being here. My name is Charlie Weeks, and with me is Steph Haggard. We want to talk to you all about some best practices for teaching with digital curricula. Steph and I obviously both work for Essential Education, both former adult educators. And while some of these practices have been distilled with Essential Ed use in mind, we really wanted to make a session and a presentation that would be applicable to lots of types of digital curricula, online instruction. And we hope that you all are able to take something from this, whether you're an Essential Ed user or not. So like I said, my name is Charlie Weeks. James mentioned I'm the Director of Client Success. I oversee the customer service and training teams here at Essential Education. Before my time with Essential Ed, I worked with the state of Oklahoma and their adult education division. And before that, I was an adult educator and program manager in Tulsa, Oklahoma for an adult education program. Steph?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm actually responding already in the chat. Let's see. I've been an adult educator for about 10 years out of the state of Maryland, and I'm currently coming to you from Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm excited to see all of the people from Kentucky on today. So, hey, awesome. Everyone.
Yeah. So before we get started, normally when we're doing sessions with Essential Ed users, we always encourage the use of the chat, see that that's happening. And so we feel free to pose questions, things that you do well, barriers that you've encountered. We definitely don't have all the answers. We have some that we want to provide, but we also want to make this space collaborative for you all to be able to share ideas with each other as well. So we will try to get to all the questions or comments in the chat that we can. So feel free to put something there and we'll respond as best we can. So before we get started, we wanted to just pose a couple kind of thoughts, ideas, kind of point to the elephant in the room that, you know, we do understand that implementing some sort of computer-based digital online curricula and content is difficult. We know that it's not easy, and it's still somewhat new, even though the pandemic's been around and online instruction, digital curricula has been around for a while. And so we just want to mention that the things that we're saying aren't necessary, you know, you can snap your fingers and just immediately do. It does take time and effort and probably continued practice and use. And as you can see with some of the bullets there on the screen, that, you know, a new resource, the idea that using it's not always discussed ahead of time. It might just be like, hey, here you go ahead and start using this semester, this year, this next go round. And so that sometimes can make it difficult on the lives of teachers and educators who are tasked with implementing said resource. Sometimes if you're in an environment, in a situation, maybe there's unclear expectations, whether it could be from your immediate boss or from state people who purchase it or from federal people who provide you access. And so again, those unclear expectations can make that difficult as well. Steph and I were thinking specifically about corrections educators and students. We were thinking a lot about logistics. As we've been working with a lot of corrections users, it seems like sometimes logistics can be a big barrier. And so that was something we wanted to mention, that, you know, could be timing, it could be changing schedules, it could be students' availability, it could just be a lot of staffing, other issues. And so we understand that that those are challenges as well. One of the common things that we talk a lot about with our users is, you know, just that general comfort and tried and true methods. And that's always there. And especially if those work, the thing that you've always done works, it's always something to consider and think about and understand that it's hard leaving that, especially if it works well, or, you know, moving away from that at least a little bit. And then finally, you know, the obvious one is some sort of lack of technology, internet access, or connectivity, or could even be technological support. I think more specifically with corrections users, that's been And educators, that's been a common thing we've seen as well, is kind of syncing up the logistics of the space and the equipment, and those that can install equipment and do all the kind of communication around all those things. And so generally it's a challenge and it's hard. And we're going to talk about some ways, once you kind of get past some of these barriers, and we're going to talk about some of these barriers, how to potentially flourish with using a digital curricula or some sort of curriculum in your classroom or in your space. But again, on the flip side, we want to make sure that we don't just start the session off kind of being Debbie Downer, that there are some benefits as well. And again, as Steph and I were thinking about this specific webinar and working with you all today, we were thinking, what are the reasons? What are the benefits of doing this and kind of persisting, even though it can be challenging? And again, one of the main things is it increases access, it removes barriers. We know that there's some users that participants can use online curricula or digital curricula in class and out of class, whether it might be in their space and in the classroom. And so increasing that access is a huge reason why a lot of people really persist and try to implement this. With that as well, it would increase student study time because they'll have more access to the material, even outside of class time. With a lot of digital curricula, it differentiates instruction. So there's videos, there could be, a lot of different ways to support learners, different types of questions and engagement. And then, with that last point there, all of those could be potentially touching on different learning styles. And so there are a lot of benefits. There are a lot of challenges. We understand that. And I know obviously the last couple of years, pre-pandemic, post, in the middle of pandemic and onward, I think we've all understood that. But we're going to continue to try to talk today and hone in on a handful of specific things that we want you to be thinking about as you try to implement digital curricula in your classroom or context. So the first practice we're going to talk about today is developing a plan. It seems so basic and simple, and it's a common thing that I think a lot of users we interact with, I think sometimes skip past. It's like, hey, we purchased this and here you go and use it and good luck. And sometimes that works, but a lot of times it doesn't always. And so, you can see the nice little quote there from Yogi Berra. Sometimes that happens, right? It's like, hey, we're going to start doing this and we're already going down the road. And then it's like, oh, well, it's the end of semester, end of the year. And this isn't exactly what I thought it was going to look like, or this isn't exactly what I wanted for my students or wanted for my instructors or wanted for me as the teacher or the instructor myself. And so this is one of the main things we want to talk about today. And we'll probably spend a little bit more time on today, is just thinking through some planning ideas, topics, and questions more specifically. And so when developing a plan, here are some of the things that I think all users should think about when they're implementing some sort of new resource, especially digital curriculum, would be, as we talked about, those expectations from leadership. What are they thinking? What do they want out of it? And having some hopefully robust discussions around that. And then kind of right after that, again, I think it's having those conversations to really flesh out what that looks like. Technology access, thinking through what do I have? What do I don't have? What do I need? What support do I have available? And then the time available. What time available do I have in my class? And what does that look like? When can I do this? When can I not do this? When is the lab available? When is it not available? And then finally, instruction. I think this is one of the big pieces after all of the other things are kind of thought about. The other huge thing is, how do I want to do this? How do I want to actually teach with this resource? How do I want my students to interact with this resource? How do I, as the teacher, come alongside my students while they're interacting with this resource? And so those are a lot of things to think about. And so we actually created a pretty, it's not basic, but it's not super in-depth planning document. Let me pause my sharing and move over to that screen so you can we can look at this together. Steph just put the document in the chat, so you're welcome to join us and click on that link. And so again, we initially created this specifically for our users, but a lot of these questions were very generalized. And so we just kind of made them even more general to kind of just to think about. And this is not something, this document here, if you can see it, let me zoom in even a little bit more so you can see this. This is not something that we think that you have to answer every single one of these questions, but it's something, again, just it is a good checklist, so to speak, to kind of walk through as you're thinking about starting the use of a new resource, a new piece of content. And so, and we're not going to go through all these questions, but we broke them up into a few different sections: instructional methods and models. You can see this, am I going to use this as a supplement to what I'm doing? Or do I want to extend learning? Do I want this to take in place of traditional class instruction? Do I want to do things like a rotation model, or do I want to really blend this into my instruction? Thinking through, or even talking with other people in your state, in your city, or through your site, what other models have worked well, and how does this fit into the instruction, the things that I'm already doing? So I think those are just some good questions to ponder, again, to think about. You're welcome to make a copy of this, download this. You should have access to do those things. Again, some questions that might direct your thinking for expectations from higher ups. What conversations have been had? We talked about this. Are there any requirements to using this? A certain amount of time has to be spent, or something along those lines. Or on the kind of the flip side, can I use this how I want? And then with technology, thinking about technology, again, there's a lot of things to think about, but what do I have available in class? What do I have available out of class? What do my students have available? This is a big one I think that we've talked a lot about with our users is, does your curriculum work on the devices that you have available? Have there been conversations with IT personnel to make sure that everything is ready to go so that you can introduce it to students? We talked about this. What type of technology do you have available in your classroom or in the lab? And then thinking around that, are there any time restrictions on those devices, on that lab, on any of those type of things? And then this is a really great question we actually just added recently. What support might be available if your students struggle with digital literacy, if they struggle with needing help specifically with using a computer, accessing the web, accessing certain things like that, what's available to them? And those are just, again, questions to ponder. We don't have all the specific answers for these questions for you, because some of this might depend on where you're at and what your site looks like and what kind of support and resources you have and those type of things. But again, these are just really good questions to consider. We talked a little bit about time. You can see that here. What days and times do I have available, and how much time do I expect my students to spend on this? And then finally, some other kind of final questions. What resources or guides do I need to have ready? Is there anyone else I can reach out to for help or guidance? It could be, again, locally or support from the company. And then how will I measure success? That's another good question I think to have with leadership is, what do they want this to look like? Is it a certain amount of study time? Is it a certain amount of completion? Is it increased gains by X amount? And then finally, are there any other conversations that needed between stakeholders in order to get started? And again, we really felt like this question was important for educators in correctional settings, because sometimes there's different layers and different sites and different places. So again, just making sure all the ducks are in a row so that you're kind of ready to go and you feel confident. So when you get started, you don't bump into something. And then finally, kind of on the last page of this planning document, we created just more of a basic version of kind of a who, what, where, when, why, or I guess how as well. But to kind of just ask yourself, okay, who am I going to use this with? What do I want to use? What piece of this? Is it the whole thing? Is it something specific? When do I want to use it? And then the how question was kind of related to instruction. How do I kind of plan to actually, incorporate this or have my students use this? And then the final question, what's the ultimate goal, or what's the why for doing this? And so again, long story short on this document and kind of on the planning section is it's important to ask yourself questions, to have conversations, and to really think through so that it kind of sets you up for success and it sets the students up for success as you kind of start to do this. And if you've already moved into it and starting something, again, you can still come back to these questions, I think, and ask yourself some of these questions. It's still very, very helpful. And so just as a summary, it's some of the same things we've already talked about. You need to be asking these questions. You can survey for technology needs. That's going to answer some of those other questions, thinking through certain time constraints, discuss expectations, not only with your bosses and anyone else locally, but with your students. We'll talk a little bit about that. Brainstorm how you can blend instructional materials, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Determine what success looks like. That's those success measures. And then finally, find other people who you work with that have done something like this. It could be specifically with the same resource, or it could be something similar, and ask them, how have you done this? What does it look like? What did it look like? What worked? What didn't work? So we're going to keep going here. Best practice number 2, we're going to talk about providing student orientation. And Steph, you're going to take that over, right?
I am. So the first question I have for you guys to maybe just drop in chat is, How do you currently introduce digital curricula to your students? Just think about how you do that. You can put it in the chat, or just at least be thinking about what are some best practices you already have. And then Charlie, if you just go ahead and swap, I'll keep going. So again, we really do think that it's important that you do a student orientation with students. We do understand that with corrections, sometimes orientation can look a little different. You may have where your students come in as a large group, or you may have some rolling attendance. I know that I've had both when I worked in detention, but I will say that what I think is one of the best things about it is that you do have an orientation plan for your students so that you can provide them ample opportunity to ask questions, to see examples of you using the system, to get them familiar with how to log into whatever you're using, to let them see exactly what the expectation is for how they're going to log in, the amount of time that's going to take, and how they know that they're successful. And just allowing them to be really familiar with the process. As always, we want to make sure that our students can see us making mistakes, but that they can also make mistakes and see that that's not really going to change anything, that everything's going to be a learning opportunity. Part of the orientation process, which sometimes gets lost as we get in and we want to just get everyone going, but I do encourage you all to take the time to make sure that your students understand how to log in, but why they're using the digital curricula, when they're going to use it, what those expectations are going to be on when, why, how, and what that's going to look like for them down the road, also their growth as they use the format. All of those things are going to facilitate buy-in from your students, and it's going to encourage them to use the products more and more. It's also going to encourage them to reach out to you to ask for more help on those things, and that's going to lead to better communication. Next slide, please. So to make sure that you're going to have a successful orientation, we have 4 key things that we like to bring up. Of course, the biggest thing is making sure that you yourself are familiar with whatever it is that you're using. That being said, when you go in and show it to them, again, you're going to want to like show mistakes or talk about how when you first went in and it didn't work and what that looked like, but making sure that you can successfully maneuver through the curricula so that you can troubleshoot and also so you can suggest things to your students. Think through and communicate expectations with students, and we're going to talk more about expectations in the next practice also. But how much time are you going to want them to be using the digital curricula? What are the expectations of what that looks like? Are we going to be looking at time versus completion of lessons? Are they going to be moving up? Is this a review? But what is it that we're expecting from the students, and also letting them know what they can expect from us as instructors about feedback or about assigning lessons and things like that. We do provide a login guide for students that I think is great. If you hear me, I always talk about how you can actually use the guide that we provide as also as some writing lessons, because it's a great little menu that they could then do as steps and all, just to check again on their understanding, and also just providing them any other resources. Making sure that your students understand that what their login is. Is it their last name and their ID number, or is it something like that? Is their password a common password? Is it something that's unique to them? And making sure that they always have that ready, and that you also have it ready for them if they forget, so that they're not wasting time, because no matter what, if a student tries to log in and isn't successful, they kind of want to give up at times. So we want to make sure that we're always moving forward. And then the big one is to give them an overview of the system and allow time for guided practice. I think that every instructor who introduces anything into their classroom should set aside, I think, probably an entire lesson time, maybe 30 minutes or an hour, making sure that students can successfully log in, log out, log in, log out, and have gone through the entire program, having some, support from the instructor so that they know what success is. And also so that once they're in there using it, they again know that this is what the expectations are, and this is what it's going to look like from here on out, so that there isn't any backpedaling later on, well, I thought this or I thought that. Expectations and usage has been set up right at the beginning. Next. So to provide a student orientation, and this one says in person or, and then we also have one on out, and again, understanding and corrections that can always look a little different. But again, this is where we really do stress introducing it to your participants, giving them that student login guide. If you have the capability using a projector, whiteboard, however it is that you can project things onto the screen for everyone to see, showing them how to log in, showing them how to find content, talking them through taking the assessments, taking those assessments very seriously, explaining to them how that's going to set them up for success and how it's going to save them time if they do take those assessments very seriously, and accessing specific parts of any of the learning plans that you're using that are the most important for you and your students. Watching any tutorials and overviews of the video as a class. I always joke that, as instructors, we always skip through those things. So probably the students do too. So working that in as you're doing an orientation and really showing students, like, these are the tutorial videos. This is the overview video. This is going to explain exactly what you're getting from this digital curricula. And then asking students if they have any questions, maybe even stopping the video during the time and adding your own comments that you may want to, say, well, I get that the curricula says this, but this is how I want us to do it. But making sure that they see that you're interacting with the system at any time. Discussing expectations of use. I don't think this can be stressed enough. Always making sure that your students know exactly what is expected of them and what is going to be expected of you to give back to them. And then providing, again, time for them to log in on their own, to take those assessments, to explore the student homeroom and dashboard, just making sure they are completely comfortable with that. Next one. And then we also, what I do want to make sure though, sorry, because I didn't realize what I do want to make sure that you all see on the orientation also is that, especially if you have a rolling attendance, is that even if when you first start and you have a large group and you get in and you really put forth the effort to make sure they're all very much comfortable and have bought in and they're able to just come in, log in and get started, as you do have other students coming into your program, into your classrooms, that really does then lend time saving for you and your students. Your other students know what's expected of them, and or they can serve as that help to help another student get logged in, and you can keep that class flowing very easily. So even if you do have a rolling attendance, making sure that you do put forth effort in the beginning with the first group, it'll always transfer over and they can be really helpful to making sure that everyone's able to log in and all. Sorry about that. I'm good. We can go to the next one. All right, so this one's on incorporating your content into your classroom. So I want you to just think about, if you're already using Curricula, what does that look like in your classroom? And are there any questions that you may have to think about or you want to ask about things like that as we're going through? Thanks, Charlie. I can go on. Okay, so a couple of ways that you can use digital curricula in your classroom is to use it as a warm-up or a welcome activity. You can always go in and pull a lesson or some questions from any of the lessons and just put those up on the board. If you aren't able to broadcast whole group, you can always go in and just pull one and write it out on the board or on the whiteboard, or create cards to pass out, or exit tickets or entrance tickets. You can preview the content and assign lessons. I always like to say this is exactly what I do before I ever do anything in math. I make sure that I'm doing it the best way possible. You can project lessons and content for the whole group activities. You can also do that for small group. You can work with just a few students. And of course, you can remediate small groups with specific content. As you put other students into your digital curriculum, they're working in their own pace. You may just pull a few and work with them more on a small whole group, 2 or 3 students, or you may just let them work together and, build some peer initiative together on that.
Steph, will you just answer? I can do it too. Someone, Sally Krager, I think is her name, asked, what is rolling attendance? I know that's not necessarily.
Oh, sorry. So sorry about that. Rolling attendance is when you have those students that just sort of come in at any time. You don't have a set attendance for so many weeks or so many processes. You just have those students that, you know, one day they show up and now they're in your classroom. Maybe none of you have ever had that. So I don't know. That was kind of a common thing for me.
Thank you. And there was another question about this curricula. Will this curriculum be made available free of charge? That was by Dr. Diallo, and Essential Ed is not free of charge. There are many curricula that are not free of charge. There are some free resources online. We'll have our specific information at the end. You can give us a phone call, but yeah, we're just kind of talking about practices that could be used for lots of different things today. Steph, you ready for me to go to the next slide?
Yes. Sorry, I was answering one too.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, so one of the things that I mentioned before, though, was like incorporating the content is if you can project a question of the day. Again, that doesn't even have to necessarily be a question on something that you're going to be talking about as far as whole group or teaching in class. It may just be something that you find out of the curriculum that kind of sparks an interest and may spark discussion just to get the class sort of moving. You could even do it sort of mid-class just to give them a break. Using questions in class as in-class competition is something great that I think is always fun because, again, it's going to show buy-in from you, and also the other students are going to get to have a little bit of fun. So I always like to create games with mine, and we kind of use like tables or one side of the room against the other side or something like that. But I'll just pull up questions that, you know, are available, and they can answer them by raising their hand or on a whiteboard or however, whatever you have available. And just, you know, making sure again that they're using the curriculum and they're feeling comfortable with it. Using practice tests to build test readiness is a huge thing to do with digital curricula because, as we know, the HSCs are online. And a lot of our students, whether they were great with video games or whatever, they're not always the best with online learning and using the computer that way. So making sure that even as they go through curriculum and things, we are giving them practice tests. We're also watching them while they take those practice tests so that we can know, can they sit for an hour? Can they stay focused? Do they need us to help them more with time management or learning to take notes or working on summarizing, paraphrasing, anything like that? But really using those practice tests, not only to help our students practice taking it, but to give instructors that background knowledge that we need to help our students be successful just in even trying to complete a test. Also, you get great feedback on it, and those are things that you can then use to assign more lessons. Use lessons for prep ideas, taking questions from lessons and creating questions of the day, flashcards. The flashcard idea came to me because I had students who did that. That's what they did in their spare time. They created flashcards, they passed them around, they used them during lunch, things like that. But also just taking questions from the lessons, especially questions that your students may have, and they come back to you and they say, hey, can you help me with this one? Keeping those and remembering that those are great things to use, reuse as a question of the day. Not only for that student, because they're going to remember that, hey, you did pay attention to me, but they're also going to be successful. And you could always try and remember to ask them to answer those questions so that they're kicking that critical thinking up a notch to explain it to the rest of the group. So just, and for prep ideas, sometimes, I know for me, sometimes you're just like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do this week? We've already done these things or these. Just looking through the lessons in the curriculum and being like, you know what, I haven't covered that in a while, or that sounds like a fun, interesting idea. Also asking your students, what is it you'd like to cover? And then going back into some curricula and seeing what you can find so you're not reinventing the wheel on your own. Flipped classroom is one of my favorite things. It looks different depending on who you are and what you like and how much of a control freak you are, actually. But flipped classroom a lot of times means you assign something to your students to look at, and then when they come back into class, they're ready to have a conversation or a discussion. Sometimes it also means, depending on where you are, and a lot of times in corrections, because they can't take it back home with them, setting up the first 10 or 15 minutes of class, they're going to watch a lesson, they're going to work through a lesson or something, and then you're going to bring it back around to class, and you're going to have what you're ready to prepare and present to them on that same topic or something similar, but so that they already have some knowledge that they can come with, or they can have questions that they're ready to ask. they can have that in-depth conversation and they just feel a little bit more comfortable. The other thing it can be is you can assign some homework that they can then they can do just a few of, so they can already come with their knowledge of what they do need to work on, or they can say, hey, I tried this, does this work? And then you can use that to help alleviate any of their misunderstandings or their confusion. Next. Your turn.
I think this is me. All right, awesome. So if we have a resource that's been made available to us, there's been a purchase, we found something that we want to use, we've developed a plan, we've oriented our students, we've started to incorporate that into class. And so the next thing that we believe that would be helpful would be, how do you monitor student progress? So this question that's on the screen could be, if you all want to type in the answer in the chat, what do you do generally that works for you? And then if you use some sort of digital curricula or resource, how do you monitor progress inside of that or with that activity? So feel free to answer or put that information into the chat while I'm talking, and you all can share some of your ideas. Love to see the things that you all have already been kind of sharing with each other. So what we want to kind of mention today is that monitoring progress is vital. I think it's important for your students to see that the work they're doing, not that it's not going in vain, because I think if they're learning and they're studying and it's helpful, obviously, and they're progressing, that's beneficial in and of itself. But I think as a teacher, we play a vital role in that. We can encourage that. If we're monitoring that and asking good questions and kind of providing a little bit of a push and encouragement with the student, we're going to be just helping them help themselves even more. And so a couple of the things that we have here, a lot of online curricula have reports and have data that a teacher can access if you've set up a class or if you've added the students to that. And so finding out a time frame that works for you, that you can go in and look at that, whether it's once or twice a week, it might be once a month, but I think doing that and getting some sort of, making some notes. Okay, what is it that I'm seeing? And as you can see here in the middle of the slide, paying special attention. What we talk a lot about with our users is, the day and time of a completed activity. It could be the amount of time that it took. It could be how recent or how long ago it was. You can see that third bullet point there, the score that they received on that content, and then the number of attempts. And so when we're training users specifically with Essential Ed, but I do think it works probably inside of other platforms or curricula, would be looking at these as a teacher. These are things to zero in on, because if you see that someone did an activity 30 times, or maybe not 30, but let's say 5 to 8, you might be asking yourself, are they having a hard time with that? Or you see a score that's really low, then you might be thinking, maybe they went through that too quickly, or maybe they don't understand this content. The duration of the attempt, the same thing, something really short, 25 seconds, or something really long, 3 hours, could indicate an issue either way, right? If it's really short, it could be, hey, they're just kind of flying through this. Maybe they're not taking this seriously, or they just guessed on all the answers. Something really long could be, again, maybe they're having some sort of technical issue, or maybe they, again, don't understand the content, and I as the instructor need to intervene. And so looking at different data points are going to give you as the instructor different ways to intervene and provide assistance to the student. And then, as you can see at the very end, going over that specific information is going to be helpful, because the student is going to say, oh, wow, they're looking at this. And then again, you can pull them off of that content, work with them individually, do pair work, or maybe say, hey, I see you did this. It looked like you had a hard time. Why don't we do it again? And let's see how you do. And then if you need more help, you and I can work together. So I think by taking that data out of the system, having those conversations with the student, again, is just going to provide them not only with that encouragement that, okay, they're truly helping me on this path, but it's going to encourage them to, potentially try harder. And then you're going to be able to provide those specific interventions at those specific places they might need help with. Steph, are we good to keep going?
We are.
Okay. Take it away then.
All right. So another really great practice is providing feedback. As we know, we all do well when we get great feedback. And so making sure that you're letting your students know that you see what they're doing, that you can see the time they're spending, you can see their successes, and you can help them work through some of their misunderstandings is a great thing to do for students, and also for yourself, because you're in your you're in that curricula, just looking to see what your students doing. So you're staying on top of all of those things. So a couple of things that you can do is daily shout outs. I like to write it on the board, things like that. Maybe having who got the, who spent the most time, or who upped their time before, or who completed it. I really like to look at how many lessons they complete and how much they're moving along that way. You need to make sure that you're looking at reports and activities, and those, like Charlie was mentioning in the progress monitoring, those are a great way for you to find the ones that you want to shout out. Again, we highly suggest that when you do shout outs, you shout out every single person who's done any work at all in a digital curriculum, because we do want to keep encouraging that so that they will keep upping that time and upping that progress. Group praise based on diligence or engagement in class and other activities. It would be a great thing if you do a flip, or you give them time in the beginning and they go ahead and they're working in a lesson, and then when you come back, they're really engaged and they're asking questions and all. It's always nice to stop, and really praise the group of, I really appreciate that we're all doing this today. I love the feedback. I love the initiative that you're all taking. This is a great learning environment, and the critical thinking skills are really going to help all of us. Looking and talking about study time, lessons completed, using the student readiness based on practice tests. That's a huge one. Students love to hear that we think they're, getting ready, they're going to be successful on taking a test, even if they're not quite there yet, but saying, hey, look at this is how much you've progressed in this way. I actually dropped a note in about using some test out quizzes and then completions at the end of units and all as progress monitoring, and pointing that out to students that, they were able to they're either able to test out, or as they finish that time, now they've tested out and they're moving along, and just how their diligent hard work is paying off for them and moving them one step closer to getting that HSC. That's it. Let's see. Other ways to do the feedback, because not everyone likes to be called out and cheered for and all of that. One-on-one conferences, discussing reports and usage. You can do that by opening up the digital curriculum and looking at those reports together. You can also do that by, meeting with your student in their section of the curriculum, and, even having them talk you through a lesson, or talking you through this is what they enjoy or they're struggling with, but making sure that, again, they know that you're in the system and that, you're really appreciating what they're doing. And then making sure you take the time to say, hey, are there any disconnects? Where can we work on this? What can we do? Grade students work as it is appropriate to do. If they're writing essays, making sure that you're looking at those in a timely fashion and making sure you're giving feedback. As they're completing lessons, Charlie mentioned it on the monitoring, looking at how many times they're attempting things so that you can catch if there is a misunderstanding or something that you can try and help alleviate when you see that they're doing it 4 or 5 times. And always, use the feedback to point toward a student's progress and achievements, not the fallback, but the moving forward part, and always keeping it very positive, and, always saying, great work. I see that you're doing this. I see this is where this is going to be successful and all, and just always being there for them with those positives. Bill, I saw yours. I'm going to get to you. I promise. Oh, that's me too.
The next.
I know. I'm sorry. I was already forming my answer.
You're welcome to. I can go back and we can talk about Bill's comment or whatever. You do it and I'll follow along.
Okay, so Bill says, I keep talking about classes and all, but they don't conduct classes. Typically they attend, and then Rebecca, hold on, at their own pace. So there are no goals or progress. Sometimes the goals in attitude. No, exactly. That's exactly right, Bill. Sometimes those goals are in progress in attitude, not in academics. I think that's true. I've worked before with students where they just they're on their own, and then all I do is check their progress. But even with that, they get some kind of feedback from me just to let them know that, yes, I've checked in with them. Yes, I've looked at their information. Yes, I know what they're doing and all. But again, it's still the feedback, because even if they're working just on their own, and it's always good for them to feel like they do have a partner in it, right? And that's what you are. We always say instructors are facilitators, and you're facilitating that learning in the best way that you can also. Sorry. strive for connection and presence, which what a great feed into that, right? While they're working in the content, you know, if you're able to be active in your physical or online space, right? So that may mean moving around the room. That may be leaning over a student. That may be just calling out across the room and saying, hey, I see what you're doing over there. That looks great. Sometimes it looks like, hey, I see what you're doing over there. Let's get back to what we need to be doing. Anything like that. But making sure that, again, your presence is known. You're not just forgotten in the background and they feel like they're just floating there alone, even if they're sort of just floating there alone, right? Because they're working individually, making sure that somehow there is a presence and they know that they can reach out to you. Being mentally engaged. I know that Charlie and I have talked about, you know, sometimes teachers, we also check out. And I think that that's a little bit different in corrections sometimes because I know that when I was in the detention setting, I was always having to keep the number and like where everyone was and where they needed to be and who was allowed to sit next to each other and all of that. But not just getting overwhelmed in that, but also staying mentally engaged of reminding myself to say, hey, I see that you've been able to stay focused for this long. It might be time to move on to something else. Or can we come and do this? And not also getting into that comfort zone of everyone's kind of on their own and it's a real nice quiet day. Let me just go on with that, right? But remembering to bring everyone back, or at least with you one-on-one, to do some kind of check-in throughout the period. And then again, knowing what they're learning and providing that feedback. We're always going to strive on providing that feedback because that's what adults need. They need feedback to keep moving. Go ahead,
Awesome.
Charlie.
No, that's great. Yeah. And I was just going to say, again, one of the big things that we talk about is that, again, with this slide, there's no judgment, but I was telling Steph when we were talking about content, I was like, I'm going to hold my hand up because there were times when I first started in adult education where it was easy to say, oh, wow, I've got my students all working. They're working individually. They're working and they seem engaged. So I'm going to just kind of hang out here as a teacher and either wait for them to come to me, which isn't bad. But there are times I'd read a newspaper, look at my phone, read news on the computer. And so I wasn't always mentally there. And so that maybe this was more specifically for me when we were talking. But I definitely think with digital content, or specifically, you know, certain curricula where students are learning on their own, or they can be learning on their own, it's easy to fall into that trap of, hey, they're doing everything on their own, like they're good. And I think it's so important to come alongside that content and continue to ask students questions, engage with them, provide them feedback, do all these things. So that, again, it can just kind of multiply that learning and make the student kind of know that they have an outlet and that somebody's kind of watching them, keeping track of them and assisting them when need be. And so, again, there's some students that will self-advocate and hold up their hand and say, hey, I need help, or come over here. And then some students that won't do that. And so I think it's just, I think by making that connection and then providing that presence, whatever that looks like, it's just kind of helping those students if and when they obviously need help. So Steph, I think this is kind of going along with the same thing. I mean, I can talk a little bit about this and you can interject. You know, what does that look like? Did you do this yet or not? No.
Interesting. No.
So yeah, one of the things that we've talked about is, you know, well, how can you do that? Obviously, I was just kind of giving an anecdote, telling on myself, and be like, if you're at your computer or you're at your station, wherever that is, and students are working on their devices or on their content, you know, you just continue to monitor them, continue to look up, read that body language. If someone's, you know, head slumps, or if someone's kind of shaking their head, or you see someone, you know, furiously erasing something, then those can be indications that, hey, I might need to get up and go over and check, if possible, how they're doing. You know, if you can, if you're on your computer and you can be looking at monitoring that progress, looking at those completion reports or other things they're doing, there's different ways different systems have that you can monitor progress. Some can be in real time, some can be after they've completed things. You know, just be doing that and let the students know, hey, I'm going to be over here. I'm going to be checking in on each of you individually. I'm going to be pulling up your profile, your report, your dashboard, your this, and seeing how you're doing. And if I notice anything, I'll definitely either call you or come over and we can have those conversations or work individually as needed. And then the final thing would be, again, I'm just kind of envisioning a computer lab here. It's not, I know that's not everybody's context, But again, if students are working, you can be up, moving around, kind of peering over students' shoulders if it's not, if it's appropriate, and kind of just saying, hey, what are you working on? How's this going? And then again, when students have those questions, they, you can work with them individually or in small groups if you notice that, again, lots of students are potentially struggling with the same concept or topic. Steph, I kind of stole your thunder there.
No,
Anything
you got it
else
all.
to add?
We know this. One thing I will say is back to the body language is not just observing their body language, but remembering yours too. Sometimes, and I am one of the world's worst now that I'm basically at home most of the time, is I can perfectly work well with my feet propped up on the desk, right? And I'm still working, but again, we want to maybe present better of like, we're not laid back and things, but that we're really working. Plus, I know in most places we don't allow our students to do that. So, just remembering that we have to lead by example sometimes, but I do love the making sure you're observing body language. There is nothing worse than when you see a student's shoulders just sort of slump and they don't even look around. And those are the ones we want to catch real quick and cheerlead to get them back on the right path, and maybe ask where's the issue and what can I do to help.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, Bill in the comments said he loves the big sigh.
Right. Yeah.
It could be lots of different ways to do that. But yeah, I think it's just knowing your students and kind of understanding when they might have experienced success or when they might have experienced some difficulty, and kind of being able to assist or praise or whatever when need be. So. And then, so finally, the last thing we want to mention is that most websites, most curricula have some sort of resources available, right? We initially did a session with this that was specific to Essential Ed, but we kind of tried to broaden it out a little bit. Sites, organizations are going to have some sort of trainer or customer service or account manager that you or your boss or the purchaser can reach out to for assistance. So just figuring out, what do you have available to you? Being able to jump on some sort of training. You can see a few of those kind of relate to training or assistance. And so, again, some sites, some places have different training options available. They have different guides and supports available. They have different, maybe they have on-demand videos or resources available. And so I think as you are starting to do that implementation, we probably should have, I think we might have, but we should include this in that planning document, would be, researching what resources are available to you, or what do you like? When you encounter difficulty on a website, what's kind of your go-to way to understand it? Is it trial and error? Is it, you find the help number and you call it, you go to their help center and FAQs and you read all that. So I think it's just figuring out what it is that you like to do, and then figuring out if that your specific resource or curriculum has those available. And then again, just matching those up and figuring out what works. And so, there's not one specific thing that we recommend other than just take advantage of it, use it, reach out, call, email, find the things that work and then that answer your questions, and utilize those. So Steph, I'll turn it back over to you.
Got it. Okay. So this is where we want to give you a little time to reflect. So we're asking that you write down 3 takeaways from today's session that you're going to try out, reflect on, or discuss with colleagues. You can drop those in the chat so you can share them with everyone, but you certainly don't have to. You can keep those, to yourself, but just make sure that you really are thinking about what are some things I can do today. When I'm looking at the chat now, I see that lots of you have things that you do or that you're thinking about, and I think that's great. So just coming up with a few things. I highly recommend that you use the document. I think that it really helps give you some food for thought in it. And I know that I've actually used it recently when I was planning my last session of classes to really make sure I had everything that I needed. And it opened up some communication for me with my administration. So just take a few minutes to come up with some takeaways, share really great ideas, not even really great ideas, share your ideas with us, because it helps us create another one of these and share your ideas out across again. And I really do appreciate your comments, everyone. These are great.
Yeah. I was going to say, what kind of teachers would we be if we didn't give people kind of a ticket out the door, Steph?
Exactly. Also, this is a great way to engage with your students, is just making sure they give you a reflection before they leave for the day.
Yeah, I think I noticed someone in the chat had said that talked about, how they surveyed their students or got feedback from their students. And again, you could do that as well after you introduce a new curriculum or resource. could be, hey, you know, did this work for you? What problems are you encountering? So again, doing something kind of like what we're showing here could be good as you're getting into it, just to find out where are those students' kind of pain points potentially. Awesome. Some people are putting some good stuff there in the chat. Thank you. So again, you can continue to think about it. We want you to, you know, a lot of sessions and webinars, it's easy to, you know, just listen and kind of go on your way. So this is our small attempt to say, hey, take a second, reflect, think, write something down, go talk to somebody about it. So all of these little things could potentially kind of move you towards some action that we hope, and obviously, you know, some sort of change in practice. So
Hey, Charlie, before we go on, I see a lot of people talking about like smart boards and that. So just so you all know, I have never had a smart board anywhere I've ever taught. I just call whatever is white. I like to call that the smart board because it sounds better than calling it the chalkboard. I literally taught where there was still the old projector thing from the rolling cart when I was in detention and all. And even in my regular classroom, it's still just an overhead, but we've never really had anything other than maybe a pull down screen or something. So, but I did suggest if you have access to smart boards and things, getting on YouTube and finding all those really great videos and using it to the best of your abilities, because they are great to work with.
yeah, awesome. So two last small little things before you leave. We appreciate your time today. For anyone who is attending the COAB session in person or virtually, Steph and I are going to reprise this session, this webinar, and do it again at COAB. You can see on Tuesday the 4th. So if you are an Essential Ed user and want to talk more specifically or hear more specifically about, you know, with these topics, some specific ways Essential Ed might, you know, work inside of these practices we talked about, please come to the session. Or if you have a colleague, tell them about it. We'd love to have them. We're going to make it real interactive, and we definitely want to see you there. So you have our contact information here. If you have a question about the practices or any thoughts or ideas, or again, about Essential Ed content, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to talk to you and assist you in any way that we can. And a lot of people are asking about certificates and different things like that. I'm going to turn it back over to James. And you might mention, James, any of the, what's the word, kind of housekeeping in terms of post-webinar follow-up.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Steph. That was an awesome presentation. Thank you, everybody, for logging in today and participating. That was excellent. Yes, all the replay of this webinar will be posted to coab.org along with the materials, and you can feel free to download them from there. Usually takes about 24 hours or so. We actually don't have a poll today. So with that, I want to thank our presenters, Steph and Charlie, again for a wonderful presentation, and thank you, everybody. And hopefully we'll see everybody at COAB 2023 in a couple weeks. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.